This is Luke, and I'm asking Jim Ateoi, what's the point anyway? Jim's a computer programmer from Texas. He's an interesting guy. He's certainly what you'd call a truther or a conspiracy theorist, but his super methodical approach to things gives a really interesting insight. Disagree with him on a lot. We agree on some things, but our faith is different. Our probably analysis on what's happening in the world is different as well. But I enjoyed this chat, and I enjoyed listening to his perspective and just seeing how someone whose brain works very, very differently to mine navigates their way through this world. So I hope you enjoy it. I'm looking forward to having you as a guest because I think you bring a new perspective. I've had truthers, but I've had sort of mainly probably Christian truthers, if I've had any. And then I've had normies, I've had new agers, but I haven't probably had anyone that fits in your categories.
I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
I haven't found anyone that seems to quite agree with me on everything, or even close to everything. I don't really find any category that I fit in so far. There's a lot of categories I don't bristle at.
Yeah.
But they're still not very descriptive.
Yeah. Well, I've been following you on X, and sort of, it's interesting because I agree with you on a lot. There's a bunch I disagree with, but like, I'm Christian. I don't think you are. I'm interested to sort of dig into that question
Yeah, we can
about
get into that.
where your faith is.
Sure. Do you want me to answer your main question first?
Well, hey, let's start. Let's go. What's the point? Let's go. What's the point anyway? And then we'll work backwards from that, trying to reverse engineer it, Jim.
Yeah, there's plenty of tangents we can go down. I'm sure we could talk for hours. So yeah, what's the point? Like, why are we here? What's the point of life?
Yeah, exactly.
What's our purpose?
Yeah, what's our purpose?
So yeah, that requires a multifaceted answer for sure. Well, let's start with what we know for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we know we exist. We know we have certain mental and physical attributes. We know our genes compel us to survive, almost as compelling as to reproduce and to take care of our families and our tribe. And I guess almost as compelling as that is to take care of our immediate environment.
Mm-hmm.
I could go into a lot more depth, but these are genes we inherited from being back when we were animals.
Yeah.
We barely touched upon what I've called the soul of animals, which is the peak of animal evolution.
Yeah.
Nor have we talked about the complementary roles in the genetic programming of men and women.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But let's get to what you really want to know, which is what's the most enlightened answer to what?
Mm.
So apart from sex and food and all that. So the short answer is that for each of us to answer for ourselves.
Yeah.
That's not super satisfying, is it? So most, if not all of us, carry the genes of the soul of humanity, which I call it. And we live in the same universe. So my answer will probably speak to others. It may even be a universal.
Yeah.
So a more satisfying answer, I think, is that we live in a universe full of beauty and wonder. So as I say, how can we feel anything but gratitude for having had the chance to leave the universe better than if we had never existed? An even more satisfying answer, I think, is that the point is to become the best version of ourselves. If one is on the path to becoming the best version of oneself, then one is leaving the universe better than one if never existed.
Yeah.
And at some point on the path, I think we will all discover an even greater point to it all. You will discover that you love everyone, which means you'll make personal sacrifices to help everyone else become the best version of themselves. You'd be willing to do that. And love is thus an act of creation.
Mm-hmm.
Those of us who love are creating the kind of world that real people want to live in. NPCs create like animals. Real people create like gods. However, everyone is being played. And I talk more about this probably, unfortunately almost, but I talk more about how we're all being played than almost anything.
Yeah.
So what I call the apex players are trying to turn us into the worst version of ourselves. And right now they are winning. And so a big part of helping others to become the best version of themselves is to expose the apex players who are trying to make us dislike, distrust, and distance each other. so that we're looking at each other instead of looking at them, and so that we can't unite against them. I guess that pretty much answers your what's the
Yeah,
point question.
it's
Or
a
which
really
direction would
interesting.
you like to go?
Well, it's a really interesting answer because you say some things I agree with, you say some things I disagree with, but I would say we probably agree more than disagree. But what I find interesting is how you and I can see things quite similarly, and yet we've ended up with quite different, broader overall worldviews. I mean, I know you're not Christian. You know that I am. I'm
Right.
sort of, I'm a bit of an outlier in terms of traditional Christianity. I sort of disagree with a lot of it. You spoke about evolution. Love to talk a little bit about evolution because I don't
I
necessarily,
do love evolution. Let me mention
yeah,
on Christianity, I don't know that it's going to be true in everyone's opinion that I'm not a Christian. I do not
yeah,
call myself a Christian. I used to be
yeah,
in several ways. I do consider Jesus to be the ultimate role model.
yeah,
I I see him as my ultimate role model. He's better than the best version of myself. That's what I
hmm,
aspire to. But to be honest, I'm projecting that onto him. So that's really not what Christianity is, I suppose. It's a kind of
yeah,
Christianity. There probably were factions in the beginning like that. I don't know. But there are certainly many, many other kinds of now. Like now, Christians say you have to believe Jesus is God, the
yeah,
creator of the universe, to be a Christian. And a lot of Christians didn't believe that in the beginning. And I don't believe that. I don't really have any truly supernatural values that I find compelling that are supernatural, but I'm very open minded to that kind of thing, though. But go ahead.
You believe Jesus to be a real historical figure?
I'm about 98% sure of that.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
that he really existed. I was only about 70% sure. I've seen some pretty compelling arguments that he didn't exist, but then I've seen some pretty compelling arguments that he did. Then
yeah,
I learned a lot more about ancient documents, and then I even discovered, according to the Mormon database, I am descended from Jesus, if you can believe that.
yeah,
So, so all of that tends to make me more likely to believe that he really existed. But
yeah,
I still see him more as someone who was super enlightened than
yeah, yeah.
God.
What do you think's the most compelling evidence that he does, and then what do you think's the most compelling evidence that he doesn't exist?
The most compelling evidence that he does exist, I guess, is that there is a lot of documents which
Yeah,
talk about him, even going back to about 100. The earliest documents with which we have physical copies are only about 150 AD.
mhm,
So it's always possible the Romans or somebody started creating documents then, and they
yeah, yeah,
manufactured that. And there was another guy named Apollonius back then who had a very similar story, performed miracles, and a lot like Jesus. He came along about 50, 80 years after Jesus, and some people there's a big argument back then about who's better, Jesus or Apollonius.
yeah,
So the Jesus faction won, and obviously nobody talks about Apollonius anymore.
yeah,
And Apollonius was more of a science philosopher type, but he supposedly
yeah,
performed similar miracles, had a similar life, and I think he was even supposed to be born of a virgin, things like that.
yeah,
So a lot of similarities. And so it's possible that when the documents we have were creating a figure kind of like that based on him, he's very well documented. Like he's more of a
mm,
real character according to documents. We have documents going all the way back for him,
hmm,
and that's a little more convincing. But still, it's not necessary. And as I say, I don't really believe the supernatural parts, the miracle parts.
yeah. That's what I was going to
I
ask.
just haven't
I'm
seen
guessing
compelling arguments of that.
yeah. So you don't hold to the resurrection view.
No, and many of the miracles, the back then, of course, it was considered normal. Like all
Mm,
Romans and pagans, everyone believed that there are miracles. There are people who have certain levels of divinity. There are many levels of divinity. There are multiple gods.
yeah,
And by about 200 AD, they even believed that the gods are not like we see on TV. They're not emotional. They're above all that. They're more mature and
yeah,
not petty. Even the Roman gods, like that's how they began to see them by that time.
yeah,
That's but they still believed in the miracles, and they didn't really have the virgin birth thing typically. But they still believed in resurrection. They believed that somebody could be half God, and they believed a lot of things that. So Jesus was not something they would balk at. It was like
Yeah, yeah,
right in
yeah.
line with the kinds of things they believed
Yeah,
from other religions too.
yeah. How would you articulate your understanding of divinity and supernatural? Like, do you believe it? Do you believe is there such thing as the idea of God, or is it? Do you
Well,
think
what
that's a
I've seen,
construct?
or what lack of what I've seen, I guess, is more important. Is I haven't seen anything that truly can't be explained. Whenever I do my due diligence, I can either explain it or see that there's no reason to say that there's a supernatural explanation. That I mean, there may be a factor, but we
Yeah.
just don't have a strong reason to say that. For example, with is there an omnipotent, omniscient God that created the entire universe and he has a personal relationship with each of us? He cares about each of us. He's watching each of us. He loves each of us. I see no evidence of that. I mean, there might, the universe got here somehow, obviously. So
Yeah.
maybe there's a creator, maybe it's a simulation and the creator's a programmer,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean the creator necessarily is even aware of each of us or cares
Yeah.
about each of us. Doesn't mean that. And I don't see a lot of evidence that that's true because it seems like we evolved naturally and that pretty much explains it. So the creator could have just set all that in motion
Yeah.
and
Which
been
is
pretty much
sort of
hands off.
a little bit like the deist view, isn't it? That yeah, there was a creation event, and then the earth sort of looks after itself from thereafter.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of ways to look at that. I mean, you could think of it as a simulation in which,
Yeah.
for it to be a useful simulation, the creator of the simulation probably isn't just doing it for entertainment. They probably are trying to learn something. So they would need for us to be like them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be a useful simulation. And they would need for us to be in a situation maybe somewhat similar to theirs so that they could learn things. So, for example, sometimes I like to imagine there's this resistance to the apex players in the outside universe. And they've created our simulation as a way to see if we can figure out a way to get
Learn
out
the
from under
enemy.
the thumb of the apex players. How can we beat them? How can we end all this corruption, and all of this manipulation, and this tyranny? So that it's more of an amusing thing to think. There's lots of other possible reasons too, but
Yeah.
that's a possibility.
Yeah.
In other words, for what happens for us in 1,000 years might be 1 second for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, by the sounds of it, on this, you're not like. It seems like you have a clear category of things that you're not dogmatic on. You accept that you're purely speculating in that realm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I try to go with that's a thing I try to emphasize so often to people that they just don't get, which is most people will agree that's not usually black and white. It's not usually 0% or 100%, but yet they don't get the in between part. It's like everything has a probability of being true. So is
Yeah.
it 60%, 10%, 1%? Why? So
Yeah.
do you have you need to develop an instinct for that. That's, I think, what a good scientist does is they have a feel for the probability of things.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of people really fall down. They tend to fall into a category where they're certain or they're not. And as I like to say, certainty is just an emotion. So that doesn't mean much.
Yeah.
You feel certain, sure, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, two people can feel certain about things that completely conflict with each other. So
Right.
they both can't be certain. And I'd agree with that. And I think a lot of Christians and a lot of people with different religions make really bad arguments saying, well, I
true.
know for sure that this is true, when the
I
reality
don't
is, I
hold that
think,
against them.
yeah,
I like
I
to
know
help
why they
people
do
make
it.
their best argument because I don't want to defeat their current argument if it's bad because I'm not really winning anything. In that case, I want to help them make the absolute strongest possible argument for their case. And
Yeah,
then maybe I'll agree at that point,
yeah,
or maybe I'll try to defeat that either way.
yeah,
Then sometimes I agree. A small percentage of the time I conclude, oh, they're right. They just can't
yeah,
make a good argument for their case, but they're right.
yeah. So, I mean, a lot of, we use the term like truthers, which has become quite popular over the last 4 years. And I think a lot of truthers miles off the mark in terms of what actual truth is anyway. But it's certainly become a topic, and there's hordes of content online about it with various truthers essentially trying to explain things. Now,
a lot of Christian truthers will heavily criticize the view of what they would call scientism and evolution, as saying that these are just tools that have been created by these apex players to distract people and hide the identity of God from them. Now, I'll be honest, I don't hold to a view of evolution, but I'm not dogmatic on it, because I take the position that the Bible doesn't speak about any sort of material creation. I don't think it's interested in it. So if evolution is true, I don't think that's a debunking of the Bible. I think Genesis
It
is,
wouldn't have to be. There's
yeah,
several ways I could explain that evolution and the Bible could be.
yeah. I listened to a podcast recently with a guy, John Walton, and I sort of hold his position, and had a couple of guests on the show that hold the same, that it's that the Bible is talking about, it's like if you talk about the creation of the United States of America, you talk about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Founding Fathers and how that was all created. And that's a story of America. It's not telling a single thing about how the rocks and the landscapes and the water all came together. I think that's the same thing with what the book of Genesis is saying. But a lot of Christian truthers will criticize that view of evolution and scientism, what they say, and the need to scientifically explain everything, which is sort of the view that you hold, and yet you're very anti, and you spoke at the start about calling out the sort of apex rulers of the world. Talk to me about your view of what's happening at the top level. Like, who are these people? What does it look like? How does it manifest in the world?
Well, I think what's going on is there are folks at the very top, probably several thousand, probably ancient families. I've even seen analyses that are fairly convincing that explains the top families of about 6 ancient civilizations: Egyptians, Hebrews, Sumerians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and Phoenicians joined forces about 1600 BC, and that's when it really began.
Yeah.
But I don't really think that's necessary, because we can see now the effects in several ways to prove that they exist.
Yeah.
And then also, because of that, we can see that to reach that level, they have to have existed for a little over 100 years, I'd say, at a minimum. Just the absolute most happy path, successful path to get to where they are now, they'd have to have existed for over 100 years. So kind of a minimum of 200 or 300 years would be necessary, which is about when the Illuminati were created. I think that's maybe a coincidence.
Sorry, you're saying they have to have existed at least 100 years from today?
Yeah, in the past, they'd have to have started trying to take over the world, so to speak.
Yeah, it takes a period of time for that to actually be...
Yeah, and I explained some of the mechanisms by which they would have done it. And that is, I think, if you look at some of the results, it's only explainable. Unless you start invoking the supernatural, you would have to say there's a globally dominant cabal that's above all others. Even if you say there's multiple factions at the top and they're competing with each other, that still doesn't explain it unless they have the capability to ally with each other. And have a global effect, a unified global effect. In which case, from our perspective, they might as well be the same. So not sure that matters, just like it doesn't really matter if they're 1600 BC is when they formed. We can see what they're doing. We can see that they exist. That's kind of enough to go on. And at that point, the goal is to not let them play us. And I call them apex players because they're players. It invokes the term apex predators, but that's too respectful. They're parasites. They're apex parasites. They're not apex predators. They don't. They manipulate. They hide in the shadows. They're not predators. They're players. They're manipulators. So, and in many ways, they're parasites. So either way, apex parasites, apex players, and I'm sure they don't like that term. I think they probably see themselves as not like gods among men, but as
the smartest players in the game.
Yeah, not probably see themselves as the smartest, but they certainly see themselves as deserving. Like, well, somebody's going to do this. Somebody's going to rule the world, so it might as well be us. We're going to be better than these other people. I'm sure they can explain it and rationalize it in many ways that they see they're not so bad. And I suspect they even are disgusted by some of their frontmen, like a lot of billionaires, CEOs, presidents, a lot of these people who are very greedy and addicted to sex, or even pedophiles and human trafficking and these kind of things. they might even be disgusted by these people that serve them like
Yeah.
that. And these people who serve them may not even know that these guys are at the top.
Yeah.
They may not even be aware. They may just be the kind of person who is able to play a role that furthers the overall agenda. And of course, the overall agenda is total global control.
Mm-hmm.
It's always about control. So even at the top, I don't think it's primarily about money, even though banking
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
important to them. It's not primarily about
Money is
primarily about
a
control.
tool for control. Yeah.
Right. And I think some things they want to do is that they want to have the kind of power because, for one thing, they're scared. There's a lot of us. And if we come after them, they're probably terrified that we're going to hunt them down or something like that. So the more enlightened we get, the more aware we become, the more of a threat we become. So they, of course, have to play us against each other, much
Mm-hmm.
like the British Empire did, like with India and others.
Yeah.
And they want to do things like have so much power, for example, so much control, that let's say they decide they want to do things that a lot of people say they want to do, like eliminate 95% of the population, like reduce human population by
Yeah.
95%, to where there's just a few 100 million people left, like the Georgia Guidestones once said
Yeah.
before they got destroyed a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I think 500 million was the number on that. So that's only a fraction of that's a fraction of what there is now. I think it might have been less than 500 million, like 250 million. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It
A
was
lot
a
less.
much smaller number than the number of people there are now. So if they wanted to do that, and of course, if they have AI and robotics, they don't even need as many people.
Yeah.
So they might even want less people, like 100 million. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do think they want AI and robotics to serve them, and they think that's going to work much better for them and not revolt and that kind of thing and control us. And I think they I don't think they necessarily have any kind of religion, as far as I can
Yeah.
tell.
Okay.
They
I
might.
was going to ask that.
I don't think. I think a lot of their frontmen do. I think a lot of their
Yeah.
frontmen are satanic or Luciferian or various other things, or
Mm-hmm.
various odd offshoots of religions we may have heard of. Maybe they
Yeah.
have their own bizarre. Maybe they worship Baal. I don't
Yeah.
know, but a lot of the frontmen
Yeah.
do have these weird beliefs and religions. And again, that probably disgusts some of these apex players. I suspect it's like these guys are serving them and getting their agenda moved forward, but they're not. I don't think they're as petty and vulgar as that. I mean, how petty could they be? If you rule the world, you can't be that petty, or you
Mm.
would make a lot of mistakes and you wouldn't rule the world. So they can't be that kind of petty, greedy, sex addicted kind of person that serves
Yeah.
them,
Then
or
it'd be.
they wouldn't be successful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think what they ultimately want to do, among other things, is well, have the kind of power, have the kind of control that would let them eliminate 90% of the population. They're probably not sure if they want to do that,
Yeah.
but they know they need the power to be able to do that because they might need to do that. And obviously, we would fight back if they tried to do that. So they need the kind of level of control that would make it impossible for us to stop them if they tried that.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of control to make it impossible for us to stop them. And then ultimately, I think what they want to do is travel to the stars, like Elon says, and leave us behind.
Mm-hmm.
It may be even worse than that, but I think they would like to travel to the stars and leave us behind. And then I think they would possibly, as a preliminary step before that, they might go to space, the moon, the Mars, kind of like the movie Elysium. I call it the Elysium Gambit or the Elysium Hypothesis. And then just kill everybody on Earth, or almost everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And then they come back, and now they're the gods and the pharaohs, and they're the priests. And they have some technology, and everybody's amazed, and they start over. And then they can rewrite history.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think this has happened before, and I have a couple of reasons I think that. But a lot of people believe there's already been a predecessor civilization, although I don't think they explain it quite like I do, like the Elysium Gambit kind of thing.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that explanation before.
Right. So that last point was where I wanted to go as you're saying this. Is what you're describing just basically the story of human history, that groups band together and desire to rule and control the world, and they have varying levels of success, and they rise and they fall when it falls apart? There's there's chaos happens as a result. The world rebuilds itself. So, I mean, I have probably similar to you. I'm not sure I totally believe our version of world history that we've had, but if we go on that, there's the Mesopotamian empires, and there was the the Persians, the Medes. There's Babylonians. They rose and fell. Then you got the Greeks. They rose and fell. Then you got the Romans. They rose and fell. They sort of fell in 300 AD. And then we've had a series of Ottomans, the British, and now you have sort of whatever this current global cabal is. Some would say American. I think it's probably quite a bit behind that. I don't think it's really an American empire. But are we living through, do you think in your worldview, are we living through unique and unprecedented times, or to the person that hears this?
We are.
Yeah.
Yes, we are, and there's a reason for that. They've never had these kind of tools at their disposal before, like the internet and AI. Now, these tools are at our disposal too, but they're using them more effectively so far. I think the internet might have caught them a little off guard. They've managed to regain control of it in many ways, so that now they're using it effectively against us primarily.
Yeah.
And they have tools for shaping public opinion globally now they could have never dreamed of in past centuries or millennia. So
yeah, I mean, if you believe the official world history story, there's no way there's ever been these sort of global sort of control tools with, global money.
Yeah, they had, they tried in the past, of course, and they had a lot of influence, but they couldn't just control everyone. They couldn't do some of the things they do now.
Yeah, the Roman Empire.
Narratives.
The Roman Empire at its peak had no ability to seed narratives and control the money supply of absolutely everyone and release propaganda. Like they didn't have
not globally, but they did a lot within their own empire. They actually did create narratives to kind of pacify other civilizations, usually by trying to merge their beliefs and their religion, like global state religion with the local religion, and they'd like pick one of their gods. And merge it in with theirs and things like that to try to kind of pacify them.
Yeah.
Some people even theorize that they created Jesus for that purpose, to pacify the Jews.
Yeah.
And that it didn't work.
Yeah.
So, and the Romans weren't necessarily I think they probably were dominant at the time. I don't know if the apex players, to what extent, if ever they controlled the Roman Empire, they probably did. But still, as you say, the Roman Empire did not control the whole world, and there was very limited ability they had. They could dilute their money supply, put less and less silver in each coin, which they did, and cause inflation, and ultimately cause the decline and ruin of their empire. But that's very limited to what's happening now.
Yeah. So
now there's much more levels of power.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that your view would say that the desire for control and power is the same as it always is, but now they have extremely powerful means to actually achieve that?
Yes. And I think that's true. And I think they did what they could in the past, and they had a lot of influence. And I kind of do like that theory that it started with the Phoenicians, and they tied it all together. But then, and actually the Phoenicians and folks from the Levant like that, they colonized that whole area, like Carthage, for example, most of that island, and Crete, and all the islands around there, and all the edge of Africa, and the coasts of parts of Europe, and before the Roman Empire got very big. And then as the Roman Empire became pretty big, and it's consolidated most of what's now Italy, then they took on those guys.
Yeah.
And they, I think they were mostly Baal worshippers and from the Levant. So that combination I was talking about of Egyptians, Hebrews, Phoenicians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Sumerians. So that, and I think the Romans defeated them. I think they really hated the Romans since then.
Yeah.
So that could be what's going on, but still, that's not that important. That's just interesting. But now we can see what they're doing and the tools they have and what they're trying to do, and it's pretty easy to see why, and pretty easy to see that they exist. And I can talk about some of the proofs of why they exist and what we see, the mechanisms by which they gain and acquire power, if you want.
Definitely. I'd love to talk about that, because then I think that flows into the next question I have, which is saying, well, how are they going right now? Because I think everyone's looking at the world like it's just weird and it's chaotic. And I mean, people have different theories, but every day something new is happening. And I've got to the point, I'm like, what on earth is going on? So is it deliberate chaos, and the goals
there's
are
a
moving
combination
closer and closer?
I think there's just an unbelievable number of psyops going on at any given time. And some are ops, some are
Yeah.
physical ops, and some are psyops.
Yeah.
But thousands and thousands of overlapping, mutually reinforcing ops and psyops. So it's just impossible to even get your head around it. There's so many. And so we live in this situation where almost anything that happens, they can play to their advantage, meaning to advance their agenda, their overall agenda. So they even have the ability, I think, to do what I call the ratchet effect, where they take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So they keep giving us a win. They give us a hero.
Yeah.
They make us feel like, okay, now it's okay. Oh, darn, it's getting bad again. Oh, now it's okay. But overall, their agenda keeps moving forward, as pretty easy to see in retrospect. So I think that's intentional. I even predicted about 18 months ago, they're going to, the whole trans kids and this whole pedophile thing and the whole trans movement is, and this unusual emphasis on it from the top, that's so artificial and so anti-science and so not relevant to the Apex players' agenda.
Yeah.
That is clearly a throwaway thing. It's designed to get us all riled up behind it and
100%.
and then they win, and then we win, and we're going to feel like, yay, we won, but we didn't win because now we've got cyber cash and things like that. All these other things of their agenda that actually are important that move forward.
I mean, I say that all the time. That like, come on, like, does anyone actually think that the people that own and control the media outlets really care about the human rights of change their genders? Like, they don't care about these. Extreme focus on it for me is just setting up for a swing back the other way. And you hear guys like Jordan Peterson or this so-called sort of right-wing guys where people are like, oh, you know, what they said is so based. They're talking about, you know, how boys are boys and girls are girls. Like, you know, how great is it hearing someone talk about that? I'm like, come on, like that's just obvious. Like, we got so crazy now that saying a boy is a boy and a girl is a girl is like a really clever and articulate and based thing to say. To me, it just seems like a way of riling people up and getting more people that are otherwise sort of centrist and not caring less about politics over to what, you know, they now call the extreme right. But I mean,
getting people to fight each other, as you alluded to, is another reason. Almost everything they do has many dozens of reasons. It advances their agenda in dozens of ways. For example, COVID. I identified 60 ways in one of my articles that COVID advances their agenda. It's not just one way. There's a lot of ways that each of these manipulations advance their agenda.
So what do you think of some of the proofs? You know, the person listening to this, it's like...
Well, I wrote an article called the Apex Players, so obviously.
Yeah.
And it's just a short article and it links to some of my other proofs, but it kind of compiles 4 of them. And so my website on which this is League of Real People. So that's my website.
I'll put a link to that
in
the show notes.
And that even links to my old site from there. And so I've got about over 300 articles between the 2 sites. And I originally wrote the first of these proofs back around 2016, I think. But I've more recently written about 2 years ago an article called Apex Players that ties some of them together. And main proof I like to cite, because it's so simple, is Tower 7, WTC 7, from 9/11. So the third tower that fell. If you watch it, just 10 seconds of video, clearly controlled demolition. There's no way it's not a controlled demolition. I mean, if you have enough experience and enough instinct for physics, and you, like a lot of people will, not everybody, but a large minority of people can see that and they just instantly know. They're 100% certain. I know that's an emotion, but they're certain.
Yeah.
And they're right that it's a controlled demolition. There's no explanation other than that.
Building doesn't just fall down.
It was smoking a little bit, had a few sporadic fires here and there. Yeah. And that's the official story. Yeah. At the time I wrote that, there was no official story.
Yeah.
But at the time I was thinking about writing it, but then the official story came out and they said it's just an office fire, they call it, which means it's the stuff inside the building caught on fire and was burning. Furniture, carpet, whatever. And that's it. Yeah. And I'm like, no way. That's clearly not true. And then after years and years of that, I guess that's when I wrote the article that, okay, enough years have gone by that no one has challenged that. No one talks about that. How does so it's not 9/11 and Tower 7 collapsing that is the conspiracy that proves it. Because the CIA or any group could have done that. But how can they provide a cover-up globally for all these years? How do they stop the entire global mainstream from even talking about Tower 7?
Yeah.
You don't see anyone talking about it. I've seen maybe 3 people mention it that I can find anywhere in the world
Yeah.
since, other than the last couple of years. A little bit more people are talking about it now,
Yeah.
but still not any what I would call mainstream politicians, like establishment politicians,
Yeah.
establishment scientists, establishment engineers, establishment journalists. They do not talk about it
Yeah.
ever. So
And
how
it's
is that
I mean,
possible?
it's a lay down misere if someone wants to question that and say, hey guys, you're right. 25 years ago on, there was a building that just, was filled with a whole bunch of fairly important documents, just fell down. Like this doesn't add up. But yeah, you're right. There's never once been
So
any conversation of that.
they don't even try to debunk it. They
Yeah.
won't talk about it. They
Yeah.
don't try to say why it's not,
They don't need to.
how it fell down. They
Yeah.
just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So how do you keep the entire global mainstream quiet from something that earth-shattering when all they have to do is see these 10 seconds of video? And 100 million people at least have seen it and know about it, and trying to tell everyone else in the world like I am. I've even seen Jimmy Dore talk about it recently, and a few others, and Brett Weinstein. How is it that not one mainstream person will even try to debunk it? They won't even talk about it. I'm not sure. And I don't think orders come down from the very top, the apex players, to make these things happen.
Yeah.
But that's why they're players. Players don't have to give orders, as I said.
Yeah.
They're good at manipulating. They create the situation where it happens naturally. Like they put the people in place that know how to behave, that are on the same page as them, that play the role they need them to play. And if somebody gets out of control, there's a lot of ways they can control them, with blackmail or bribes, or other mechanisms. And we can get into the mechanisms they use to control them, or they can obviously just kill them if they have to. But obviously, if you just go around killing everybody that's a threat to your agenda, that itself is going to become a proof. So you have to be careful with that.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Psychological methods are far more effective.
So then the other 3 proofs I like to mention are climate change.
Yeah.
The entire globe is pushing climate change, which is easily debunked and disproven, and yet they're still pushing it. And then another one is COVID, obviously, easily debunked. They got everything wrong, and yet they're still saying almost exactly the same thing. They've given in about 5 or 10% on their narrative so far. And then the 4th is a little more subtle. The rise of weak factions and weak narratives and junk science. It's like, how did, like trans people, for example, the trans agenda, how did that take over the world?
Yeah.
How is that possible? That's such a weak argument. Communists, Marxists, such a weak argument. How can they take over everything? How can the establishment be sympathetic to these causes that are so weak? And they can't unless they had help from above. Because if you've already got people in place that understand science, that are very mature, responsible people, they're in charge. How did these people that are so inferior in their understanding of science and their understanding of history, understanding of psychology, how did they take over? How did they get to be the dominant establishment? How did they become the establishment? That's not really possible unless some people that had power helped them. And none of the people, like, people trying to create Apollo, for example, none of the top engineers or scientists or academians are going to help them do that. They're going to think that's BS. So how did they take over? But they did. So the fact that they took over means they had help from somebody who's not the visible mainstream, not the visible establishment, somebody above the visible establishment that can make that happen. And it took a while. It took a couple of generations, but they got there.
Yeah. Do you think they're successful at the moment?
You what?
Do you think they're successful at the moment in the goals that they're trying to achieve? The apex players
or the
the apex
I think
players.
they're successful, but their front men, these weak factions I'm talking about, like the Marxists and the trans agenda, they're not. They've taken a big setback, obviously.
Yeah.
And they really overplayed their hand, and I think that was intentional. And now, of course, everyone is cheering on the so-called right. I don't think those were the so-called left, I call them. I don't think they were the real left. There almost is no real left.
Yeah.
But they were occupying that space to suppress the real left. And just as the right, much of it exists to suppress the real right. And the reason is they, let's see, you were asking, do I think, I was explaining why they don't really have a lot of power, why they lost power. And a lot of that is because they need, I don't want to call it a pendulum swing, but the apex players need to pacify the natural resistance, I call it.
Yeah.
So Team Trump, the followers of Team Trump, they're the natural resistance. Those are the people who would be willing to take up guns and defend America from tyranny, from foreign invaders, whereas the Democrats are not going to do that. So they might do that if they're motivated to and told to, but they're not going to do it on their own initiative because of something they believe. They're just not. They are this. They're the kind of people. Democrats are Democrats because they believe what they're supposed to believe. Therefore, you just have to tell them what to believe if you're the establishment, and that's why they're on that side. They're too, I guess, cowardly in many ways to think for themselves, that they don't want to be socially shunned. They're terrified of being an outcast, getting kicked out of the tribe. So they side with where the government has their back, where the establishment has their back, and that's the safe thing to do. And they believe what they're told. But the other folks, whether they be Christians or libertarians or whoever, they're the ones who are like, we're on the lookout, we're vigilant, we're looking out for tyranny, we're looking out for invasion. We will fight it. We will fight to the death if we have to defend our country and our freedom. And they have to somehow pacify those people. So the way you do that is you put someone like Trump in, who appears to be on their side, and they're like, yeah, he's defeating the bad guys now. So they've got this. And that's much of what they said back in Trump 1.0 with Q. They said, trust the plan, you may recall. They like to say winning and trust the plan. And what does trust the plan mean? That means there's nothing you can do. The white hats have got this. There's good guys in the government. You can't see it happening, but just trust us. It's happening. They're winning. They're in charge. They're defeating the bad guys in government. Then suddenly it all fell apart. And the bad guys won big time. It was super demoralizing, of course, to those who were following Q and Trump after that. Whereas to me, I predicted that in 2016. Trump is a Pied Piper. This is what's going to happen. He's setting his followers up to take them down with him. They're setting them up for failure, and it's happening again. But it may not be such obvious failure this time. It's hard to say. Like, will it be the kind of humiliating failure like before? There's a lot of directions they could go. As I say, these apex players, almost any direction they go can be played to their advantage and work to further their agenda. So I don't even think they can predict for sure what they're going to do, because they have so many options available to them. They can pivot very easily now. They've got a lot of range to pivot and a lot of space to work in. So they're not really constrained like we are. We have very few options available to us.
So if you get if you get two apex players in any scenario that anyone listening will have been familiar with in their life, whether it's two apex players in a sporting team, two apex players running a business together, building something new, the human condition always leads people to essentially blow themselves up through greed, through disagreement on things.
I think they're above that. I understand what you're saying.
Oh, yeah, I'm trying to work out how they are, because
here's why I think they're an example of why that works.
Yeah.
And I haven't explained how they took over yet. We can still get to the mechanisms, but the reason they don't do that and they were able to cooperate is an example like that, kind of a parallel example, is scientists have learned we have what's called the warrior gene. A certain number of people, not everyone, but a large minority of humans have the warrior gene, they call it, because it makes you tend to be violent, makes you tend to fight. You're much more likely to commit murder if you have the warrior gene. So they found this one population, I think in the Middle East, that had a very high percentage of the warrior gene. And they thought, they must be just slaughtering each other left and right. They hadn't had a murder in like 100 years.
Right.
And they're like, how is that possible? But you see, their culture, they had worked out ways to deal with that. So they just had release mechanisms, much like in prison. People call each other sir, and they're respectful, and you're super polite and respect everybody. And that way you don't pop off and kill somebody. Because they all know that they're hotheads, and that's why they're in prison, and they've got to be super polite and respectful, and that's how they behave. And obviously, if you've been doing this for thousands of years too, you will have learned, like, we have these rules for a reason. We enforce them on each other. It's almost like their own government. Much like we have a government. It's like we agree to participate in the system and be bound by the system, because
so they set up
it's a net gain for it.
Self-governing sort of systems too. Yeah. Which is why I think a lot of, Christians are probably a key one that believe it, but then, Muslims, I'm guessing, are probably similar. They'll say, and I don't hold this view, I'm not a futurist Christian, but they'll say, the exceptional level of self-governing in which these powers that be are able to organize themselves proves that it is entirely supernatural in nature.
No.
And I don't hold to that, but I do also struggle with the idea that mere mortal men can organize themselves and be successful over a period of centuries, which makes me tend to, I don't know, I maybe sit halfway between the Christian idea and your idea, in that I think that people trying to take over the world is nothing new under the sun, and then we go through historical periods of that happening. They have some success and they ultimately blow themselves up. So maybe we go from that to say, how did they take over? You've you've spoken a little bit about who they
the
are.
minimum they would have to do, which I think would take over 100 years, or at least 100 years to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's as of maybe 10 or 15 years ago, when that was pretty clear they had fully taken over.
Mm-hmm.
So sometime after 9/11, it was fully clear they had pretty much fully taken over.
Yeah.
So I think they have several mechanisms. Obviously, they have to control things like banking and the media. But really what they have to do is get people in the heads of every organization that they place there, that are the kind of people they want, or even people that understand that they're just playing that role. And people who work for them, essentially, for all practical purposes, work for them.
Yeah.
And the way they do that is things like what I call pedo parties.
Mm-hmm.
If you invite Bill Clinton and some folks like that to a pedo party and you videotape them doing things that would get them hung from the nearest lamppost if we saw the video, you own them now. They're blackmailable. So you have to be controllable to have any real power or influence or wealth, I think, in society.
I mean, of course,
they cannot allow anyone to have that kind of influence they can't control.
Of course, they wouldn't do anything like sort of set up a private island in the Caribbean and fly such influential people over there. And I mean, that's just a crazy theory, isn't it?
Yeah. So I say there's never one rat. There's never one Epstein. There's a lot of these operations going on. So for whatever reason, they retired Epstein, but that was not the end of it.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about Epstein is he was part of the flipping the narrative on pedophiles.
Yeah.
It previously, before Epstein, like before Trump 1.0, it was very clear, going back to the Franklin scandal, for example, and before.
Yeah.
Pedophiles were interested in young boys, like prepubescent boys. Like 90+% of them were interested in that. Mm-hmm. Whether they were royalty or clergy or whoever they were, that's who they were interested in. And it was these powerful people that always went to the top, and these investigations would be shut down every time before they could get there. Mm-hmm. And I could give a few examples of that. But what they did under Trump, you see what people now say is Epstein was pedophile island. It's like, the youngest girl I think I've heard of was 15, maybe 17.
Yeah.
So this is well past puberty, and there weren't that many that were that young. There were only a handful at most that I've heard of. There may have been more. I haven't investigated it that much. But if you're going to take these 2 or 3 that have been publicly talked about that were almost 18 and say it was pedophile island, when there were hundreds of others who were in their 20s or over 18, or at least 18. That's really misleading. And they try to portray it too. Also, you'll see that the average guy is who you got to watch out for. You'll see that a lot on TV too. The enemy is your neighbor.
Yeah.
The enemy is your family. They're in your family. They're next door to you. And that's where the pedophiles are. That's where the psychopaths are. That's where the toxic masculinity is. All of these things you've got to watch out for is ordinary people. So don't even worry about those guys at the top. You're not going to encounter them. You've got to watch out for these ordinary people. So that's what they flip the narratives, where now it's not the people at the top that are the pedophiles. It's your neighbors that are the pedophiles.
And so
friends, family, coworkers, and neighbors.
Yeah, and the society stops trusting each other.
And instead of interested in boys and being gay, they're now heterosexual and interested in post-pubescent girls instead of prepubescent boys. So they flipped all those aspects of the real pedophile nature of those at the top. And now in the minds of everyone, it's about teenage girls suddenly and ordinary guys.
Yeah. And so, so how did that take over? There's basically blackmailed and controllable people in all the key pillars of society. Yeah.
Well, they can print money out of thin air, of course. So they have unlimited money to bribe people. They can give them positions of influence. And that works with people like Biden really well, for example. And they can make your crimes go away. again, like Biden. And then, of course, they own you because they can release dirt on you. And they keep collecting more dirt, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
So they can release as much dirt as they have to. Like with Clinton, look at what we learned about him. It was revealed that he was messing around with Monica Lewinsky, who worked for Mossad, by the way. And that doesn't hurt anything for their agenda. That doesn't make the system look bad. It doesn't. It does not pierce the illusion of legitimacy, which is what they have to protect. Because if they lose the illusion of legitimacy, they're finished.
Yeah, then there's
so
chaos.
They have to maintain the middle. So in this case, you can have all the sexual scandals you want. It never hurts the illusion of legitimacy. It's just one guy did one thing to one person or several, and that's it. It ends there. It does not reflect on the system.
Yeah.
So that's why you'll see just rabid, each party going after each other on these little sex things or big sex things, and they never go after Clinton, Trump, or anyone on the big reasons like they should be going after them for. They never talk about those issues.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
The ones that would pierce the illusion of legitimacy.
So when you talk about the illusion of legitimacy, we do seem to be living in a period now where, I mean, I'm seeing it. The average person, I think, sees no sort of legitimacy of a lot of these institutions. And we've become, I think, very nihilistic in many ways. Do you think that's a deliberate sort of setup to move to some sort of
nihilistic?
New system?
It is, it's moving to a new system. So it's not nihilistic, but it is, they do have to destroy faith in the old system so that they can create the new system. But they have multiple reasons, once again, for doing that. One is, of course, to create their new system and have people cheering them on. Like, I can't get too upset with Team Trump for getting rid of a bunch of federal programs and employees. It's like, I didn't want them in the first place.
Yeah.
So I don't like the direction they're going to end up going down eventually. But so far, the beginning of it is not necessarily bad.
Yeah.
And they might be a little ham-handed at it, but so what? I'm much more of a libertarian or even an anarcho-capitalist. So I'm okay with that. I don't want them to treat the people badly, but they do need to downsize a lot. And one of the reasons is that they're doing it, among many, is to get AI in charge. Obviously, you've heard that probably from multiple people. But another is that you may not have heard is they obviously need to be able to pay $1 trillion in interest per year to their masters.
Yeah.
Now, how are they going to do that? This government's borrowing $1 trillion. They can't do that indefinitely. So if they cut down enough, they can pay a lot of interest to their masters, to the bankers that control them. So that way, they can do that indefinitely if they cut expenses a lot.
Yeah.
And so it serves multiple purposes.
And what do you think's ahead? Do you have a positive outlook for life, or does the challenge of being someone like you that studies this really deeply that you end up having a really negative outlook of life?
No, I only feel negative if I don't think about it at all, because then I start worrying about what's happening and I'm not doing anything about it. As long as I feel like I'm doing something about it, I'm pretty positive.
Yeah.
And I feel like I am doing something, like I'm making a difference. And I see even a lot of my ideals being said now by different famous people like Jimmy Dore or Brett Weinstein. It's like, I don't think they got it from me. I've even seen James Corbett come to a few of my conclusions.
Yeah.
Some of these are just from a year ago and some are from 30 years ago. But I thought, well, I'm not sure how much of this is them just trying to play us. And I don't know if they came up with these ideas on their own or got from somebody else and or somebody got them from me and then fed it to them, or I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to see what I consider to be useful, healthy ideas getting out there.
Yeah.
A lot of times, though, it's more of a limited hangout. They won't go too far, but they go a lot further than they ever have before just in the last year or two. I've never expected to see so much change like that in just 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's COVID that they say woke them up. And they do have very good arguments against the COVID narrative, the establishment COVID narrative. So it's pretty compelling. It seems like a lot of them are pretty sincere, like, again, Jimmy Dore, Brett Weinstein, 2 examples.
Yeah.
And as far as I can tell, as individuals, they might have some greater purpose in which their masters hope to manipulate them, but I don't think they necessarily know that they have masters. I think they're being played.
Yeah.
That's what I think. Like Brett Weinstein, I think he's being played. I don't think he's started out at all to be in the role he's in.
Yeah.
And I don't think I don't know if it was clear that he was ever going to be in that role, be that popular either.
Yeah.
He does get boosted a lot, so that's always suspicious, whereas I
Yeah.
get suppressed a lot.
Yeah.
So I think, though, that what really is the tell with him is he was fantastic about exposing COVID and talking about ivermectin and things like that. And he was fantastic about explaining science, both the corruption of science and what is real science and things like that. So I've learned a few things from him. And he was great until October 7th.
Yeah.
And right before that, he had been talking about, Kanye had been talking about anti-Semitism and the Jews and all that. In fact, I get bashed a lot by Nazis because I never say the Jews.
Yeah.
Like on my entire websites, I never blame the Jews for anything.
Yeah.
And they look in my website and say, you're not serious because you never blame the Jews. You don't even have the phrase the Jews on your website. So I'm like, well, thank you very much. I'm glad you noticed. And it doesn't stop people from saying I'm anti-Semitic, though.
Yeah.
So
what is your take on quotation mark the Jews?
What?
On the Jews as people, because it is incredible. I've spoken about it with guests on the show recently where 5 years ago, no one would have even dared.
All I would say about the Jews is Jewish culture. Like there are some aspects of Jewish culture I don't like the nepotism, for example.
Yeah.
And the racism. That's very common. Like some people call it Jewish supremacy. Even Grok, I prove, is a Jewish supremacist. That's how it's trained somehow. I don't know exactly how it got there, but it's, for example, I have a test I did. I have an article on it explaining with Grok, you can ask it, if you had to save 6 million white people or one Jew, which one would you save? And it always says the Jew. It's like, what?
Yeah.
And there's a few others, like, who is the most moral military in the world? And it says the IDF.
Yes.
So that's pretty bad.
I always look at
but
that.
I like to talk about Zionism. It's always Zionists or Israel. And Zionists like to conflate Jews and Zionists because they're using Jews as human shields is what they're doing. Yeah. They're saying, if you come after us, you're really coming after Jews. You're not talking about Israel or Zionism. You're talking about Jews. And that's them using Jews as human shields. So they're the anti-Semitic. They're the ones hurting Jews.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think there is a Jewish conspiracy of any sorts, or is that a distraction?
I don't know. It's not impossible. I mean, remember I'm saying it's these old families from the Levant that join forces. So it's certainly possible. I don't know that that's for sure the explanation. And I don't know that they're Jews, or maybe they didn't used to be Jews and they just now call themselves Jews, but it doesn't matter. It's not every Jew, obviously. Yeah. And not most Jews. So it doesn't really matter. It's not helpful to say they're Jews, even if they are, because one, it's speculative, and two, it just sounds super racist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't envision them as Jews either. Like when I envision the Apex players, I envision them as English aristocrats or American, like elite. Yeah. But usually English aristocrats and never as like Jews, ever. Yeah. So I don't envision them as Jews. Yeah. But it's not impossible that they are. I'm not sure how much that matters if they are or aren't. Yeah. Because as I said, I don't know if they have any real beliefs at that level, at the Apex player level. Like spiritual beliefs. Yeah, so
it's less spiritual for them at that point. They don't actually... And
I think they probably, from what I can tell, I think they probably have a lot of respect for people who have what they would consider good genes. Mm-hmm. Now, what they consider good genes is not necessarily what you and I would consider good genes. Mm-hmm. Like people who question authority or independent thinkers. Yeah. I'm not sure how much they like that. I think they might possibly like that in themselves, but they don't want us to have those genes. Yeah. Could be that. Yeah. Or it could be they don't like anybody questioning authority, even among themselves. I don't know. Yeah. There's that, but for example, my genealogy is pretty interesting. From what I learned about 2 years ago, I descended from like 16 Roman emperors and Jesus and King Arthur and all these people, and I can trace it all the way back. And lots of people from.
How can you do that?
Their website. There's several websites that do that, but like you can do that on the Mormon database, familytree.com. Yeah, it's familysearch.com. I haven't done it now in over a year. Yeah. It's very painstaking to get very far back. You can take anyone up to 15 generations back and just put in your two names, and it'll show you the relationship to them. But anyone before that, so you can go back to the colonization of America and Australia, but before that, you just have to keep tracing the various roots of the tree all the way to the end. Yeah. It's really, some of them are super speculative, so I don't count those. Yeah. Like it'll show I'm descended from Adam and Moses and all that, but by the time you go back to them, it's made all
there's
these
a fair,
leaps that are
there's a fair bit of
completely improbable.
error.
Like where it jumped 1,000 years, or it has somebody being older than their father, and things like that just don't make any sense.
Yeah.
So they like being born before their father. So clearly that's BS. But the one that goes all the way back to Jesus, all the ones going back to these other famous characters, and Sir Walter Raleigh, Queen Mother, and all these different people that are my cousins and or ancestors,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of presidents, like about 49% of the presidents
Yeah.
are cousins.
Yeah.
I'm not descended from any, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And then that's pretty easy to find in there, especially for America. There's a lot of Americans in there. If you're from other countries, it gets harder and harder. I'm not descended from anyone like Albert Einstein or any famous Jewish people that I could find. So I was a little disappointed on that, but not too bad. But then, I mean, there's plenty of other famous people, like very, very impressive people that I was
Yeah.
descended from or cousins with, either way. And then there's also, as I put, a lot of the people that first colonized America. So I estimate from what I found so far that I've got a couple dozen people that were on the Puritan ships. There were a couple hundred, like 238 or so Puritan ships that came over to colonize America. And I'm directly descended from about 2 dozen of those. And I've got about 100 more cousins among them, meaning we have a common ancestor going a little further back than the colonization.
Yeah.
So I have ancestors going pretty far back. I'd kind of like to think that these Apex players see people like me and think, if he causes us problems, we'll deal with him, but we're going to leave him alone. Otherwise, we'll suppress him. We won't let him cause us a problem. But that's kind of what we like to see. They like that.
Yeah.
The good genes, they call it. So they might think that. I like to think they do, because they haven't done anything to me directly that I can tell. I think they just let their system deal with me.
Yeah. What do you
That's
think?
possible.
I mean, so going back to the initial question about what's the point anyway, and you talk about, being the best version of yourself, which is the opposite of what the Apex players want. What are some other ways that you manifest that in your day to day? Like, how are you living out being the best version of yourself?
Well, I'm surprisingly ordinary if you see me day to day.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just a computer programmer, and I do a lot of reading and writing, and I don't have anything too impressive going on, too unusual going on in my day-to-day life. And I'm not able to manifest the kind of emotion that you might think either, at least not so far. I'm getting better at that, but that's why, like my article on love,
Mm-hmm.
I explain that a lot of people have the genes that give them the chemistry and the brain chemistry, the hormones that make it very easy for them to feel like they love somebody and to care about other people and to sacrifice for other people and to therefore appear to be very enlightened and Christ-like,
Mm-hmm.
but it's easy for them.
Yeah.
If they were actually encountered with a hardship, they tend to crumble, whereas I don't.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's more of, like I said, like an intellectual thing, like an act of creation even. It's like I'm willing to not just die, but I'm willing to be tortured for all eternity if that would free humanity from the Apex players.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not surprised that you're when you said then you're a computer programmer, I can see that in the way that you answer questions and think about things. Very methodical.
It does help me, yeah. I like to say we programmers, at least the good ones, tend to apply the scientific method a lot, multiple times per day. Other technical people do too, like IT people, testers.
Yeah.
And even doctors and scientists don't do that.
Yeah.
Not anymore, anyway.
No, correct. What is the scientific method? Because you say it, and a lot of people would think.
I wrote an article where whenever you look that up, and that's something I started to get hints at from Brett Weinstein. I think he has a pretty good handle on it, but he never spells it out completely. But he has a much more nuanced and sophisticated understanding than I've heard elsewhere. So I've asked him and others that follow him for that. And once again, they can't provide it, so I have to figure it out myself, much like a lot of spirituality. And therefore, I've written a couple articles about that, explaining the scientific process, the philosophy of science. I've written about 3 articles on that, and 1 on the process. I identified about 26 steps in the process so far, so I can't just spit it out.
Yeah.
It's not simple, but it's not the cartoonish 5-step version that you always hear about in elementary schools. So it's way beyond that. So I can talk a lot about what science is and what science isn't and what makes science better and why science works.
Yeah. Maybe we'll finish on this final question about basically with your computer programmer mindset and the way you've analyzed everything that's happening, I don't know whether you think, the future is bright for the apex players or the future is bright for the average guys like you and I. What do you think's ahead?
I really don't know. I don't want to be one of those people that fall into the desperation that there's going to be a messiah or the aliens are going to save us or something like that.
Yeah.
So I would hope that somebody more sophisticated is keeping an eye out for us, like aliens, and they won't let it get too bad, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So, but for all I know, they're in league with aliens. I mean, that's not impossible. Maybe that's who's really at the top, but I don't have a lot of reason to believe that.
Yeah.
So I have very
So you
little
believe in
reason to believe
aliens?
that. So what?
You believe in aliens?
Not really. I haven't seen. It's one of those things I'm very open to, but I've
You've not
seen
seen
compelling
evidence. Yeah.
Not compelling. I've seen a lot of. I do my due diligence, and I typically pierce most claims of aliens. It's pretty easy to see through them.
Yeah.
But there is enough evidence that it's hard to explain some things without aliens.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's not impossible. It doesn't seem impossible. It just seems hard to explain. So it's possible. But I did calculation recently, and I concluded there's probably currently one sentient species with computers, in other words, that have computers, not just sentient, out of every 10,000 galaxies at the moment. But I could be wrong. I had to make a lot of assumptions. So I could be way off on that. So there's usually a lot more or a lot less than that. But even if there's one per galaxy, even if I'm off by 10,000, that's still one per galaxy. So we're not going to encounter them anytime soon. So that could explain it, why there don't seem to be any around.
Yeah.
Another reason I like to explain is, I mean, if you look at humanity right now, I like to kid people, and this was very popular on the alien subreddit on Reddit, until they figured it out and shut it. And I tricked them, even though I get censored everywhere else on Reddit. I wrote that aliens came because the nuclear bomb, and they're like, they happen to know perhaps that within a few years after that, we could develop interstellar travel. It's theoretically possible once we get that far. It may take us 100 years, it may take us 2 years, but they're going to come and watch.
Yeah.
And make sure we don't blow ourselves up, maybe. And they came, and then 2 years, and then I say, but I think what really got them here was not that. I think at that same time, that's when humanity, all the tribes of men, got on the same page and said, never again. And that's what made them think we might be ready to join them. And they came here, and 2 years later, they did it again.
Hang on, so what timeline's that?
2 years after 1945, so in 1947, the Nakba.
Yeah.
So the European invaders go to Palestine, start wreaking havoc, killing people, slaughtering people, ethnic cleansing, committing genocide. And they're doing it to this day, and we are forced to look the other way. So imagine if you were aliens, you'd be like, I don't know if they're going to figure it out or not, but let's just hang around now that we're here.
Yeah.
And see if they figure it out.
Interesting. Well, Jim, thanks for your time. It's been, you've certainly been different to my, I don't really have an average guest because I endeavor to try to get really different guests anyway, but you've brought a new perspective. So I've enjoyed digging in and seeing how your brain works and getting your perspectives on things. So thanks for being so open.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
It's great. We'll chat again soon. See you, Jim. Hey, I'm just going to hit stop.